Welcome to Shop Talk Live, episode number 315. Amanda is out sick today and resting as she should be, so you are stuck with me, old school, for the intros and outros of this episode. We are going to start this episode off with Mike and me talking about our experience at last weekend's Fine Woodworking New England event at the Connecticut Valley School of Woodworking in Manchester, Connecticut. And we'll answer a couple of questions, or Mike will answer a couple of questions specifically. And then, as promised, Amanda sits down and answers your metalworking questions, your maybe woodworking specific metalworking questions with Sophie Glenn. We're veering outside of our normal beaten path, and it's all good. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that Michael Cullen's surface carving class is happening again. Head on over to finewoodworking.com/elearning and check out the information about one of my favorite carvers. It's Michael's method of surface carving, adding decoration to his pieces is just second to none in my book. And if you want to learn how to do it from one of the greats of the technique, of the style, this is your chance. So again, head on over to finewoodworking.com/elearning. All right, let's get going. How you been, Mike?
I'm doing good. So today is Thursday. We wrapped up Fine Woodworking Live last Saturday, but it still feels a little bit like the Monday after the show feel. It's been a long and a short week. It's like, it's Thursday already. I don't know if I've actually done anything yet.
Yeah, I think it took me 2 tries to go down to the shop and like rewind my cables and stuff, like, because like I like to have everything organized and like, yes, those cables go in that box. And I went down there initially and I was just too tired and wound up like sweeping or not sweeping, but like breaking down cardboard that's been there for 6 months.
Hey, you gotta know when it's time to break down cardboard.
Yeah.
Like that's all you're good for. Okay, I can do this.
That legitimately needed to happen regardless. But the event was awesome. I feel like I experienced none of it though. I feel like you were on the front lines and I was like behind, I was like dug out in a little corner and no one even talked to me the whole time. It was kind of nice. But how was your experience?
It was good. I think there's always sort of this stress leading up to the event. The closer it gets, the more details you start to think of. And it's like, oh, no, we should have done this, or, oh, should we do this? And do we have time? But overall, things, the prep went really well. And 99% of the credit goes to Bob Van Dyke, who was just a beast in putting this event together. I say that I was telling people that Bob was responsible for 95%, and the 5% I was responsible for, I didn't even really do that good of a job on. So I was just happy to be there. But yeah, like once that, the clock strikes 8:30 a.m. on Friday morning. Okay, nothing else we can do. And so you kind of, my big stress was like, I wasn't too concerned that nobody was going to show up. I thought we were going to have a good turnout. I think my bigger stress was, are we going to get too many people here to where it's a bad experience? And we had a lot of people, I think roughly 1,000 people over the 2 days, which felt just about right to where we were doing the live demonstrations in the back. And those were, for the most part, comfortably standing room only. I think we had, 70 seats available. And there was always 10 or 15 or 20 people just kind of hanging out in the back, standing up, watching the demos. But I think that was fantastically run. All the demonstrators were amazing, really stepped up to the plate. And kudos to you, Ben, not only for wrangling everything, all the tech, making sure things went off without a hitch, but we scheduled these demonstrations on the hour. And you can't get any woodworker to talk for less than an hour on any subject, period. And I was just afraid, oh no, by the time we go through all these, we're going to be like, the first person's going to go on for 2 hours, and then it's just going to just go into chaos from there. But you held people to, you you kept these things running on time. How did you even do that? Were you giving them
I'll
the
be
evil
honest with
eye?
you. I feel like everybody was aware of the constraints and how out of hand it could easily get. So all of the presenters really knew that it was on everyone. It was like, and I told everyone, I was like, I'm gonna give you like a 10 minutes, like at quarter of like 10 minutes, and then I'm cutting you off at 5 of, because we've got to swap everyone in and out. And I felt really bad because during that 5 minute swap in and out, that was an opportunity for people. Oh, I'm gonna say hey to Ben, and it was like no, like I'm in chaos mode right now. Because 5 minutes to swap out benches and presentations and slides and all that stuff was really tight.
Yeah.
But I can't believe, I mean, we really got it done. There was one end of day 2, we started one maybe like 5 minutes late, and then they went 5 minutes over, and then the last one was David Duyard. I looked at David Duyard. I said, I'm gonna let him go a little late. I forget who it was. He goes, no problem. And then David got to go 15 minutes late. It was like, we're done. This is totally cool. When you've got, David, steam bent parts live, which is just, I think, a little, you're inviting chaos and failure into your world.
Yes.
So it's like the pressure of doing that, he's allowed to take whatever he wants. But yeah, the presentations were great. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't think would be a presentation that would have so many people enthralled. Like Will Neptune, with his it's like absolute, I mean, this is period furniture geekery at its depths. And he just had an audience of like 50 or 60 people just totally engaged the whole time. And it goes to show like how dorky our audience really is and how much we really enjoy every aspect of it. There was, presentations from, on gilding and all sorts of stuff. And just so everyone knows listening, if you're an unlimited member, you can still go back and watch. There's 2 full videos on the website of, it's like a 7-hour long video one day of the entire set of presentations, and an 8-hour video the other day of everything. So if you missed it and you want to go back, certainly head on. I'll post a link and check it out.
What if I'm not currently an unlimited member? If I sign up for unlimited now, do I still get access to the show demos?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you get access to, it's they're just posted of the YouTube, of the unlisted YouTube live stream. So if you sign up, you can, as with all of the other 3,000 or 5 or 7, however many thousand things we have,
yes,
you go all the way back through the archive. So, but yeah, you were there demoing dovetails. I saw, but I didn't even know that until I saw like Erica's post, Erica or Madara by Erica on Instagram.
Yes.
But
yeah, that was like, I'm sitting there doing this and I look up and I see someone kind of out of the corner of my eye. It's like, oh, they look kind of familiar. And I kind of kept going. I look up, it's like, oh no, that's Erica from Instagram. And I totally got like flustered and I lost my train of thought, what I was saying. Afterwards, I looked back at the dovetails I demoed and they were just like gnarly. It was like the worst dovetailing job I ever had. So Erica, it was great to see you, meet you for the first time finally, but you threw me off my game, I have to say. So
I love that. I love like the Instagram stardom that like runs deep of like, I've had Zoom. We recorded with Erica one time, and I talked to her all the time on DM, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, or like Rachel Moody was another one. It was like you're in person. It's great seeing people. Yeah. And actually, Rachel and Shane were the only 2 people that I legitimately talked to. There was there was a moment where Amanda took over the switcher for the live feed, and I was like hovering a little bit, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, she's really in. Oh, she's got it down. Okay, and then it was like, oh, I could go do stuff, and I realized I was like, oh, I am definitely not in talk to people mindset right now. And when you go in that zone, it's a mental shift, and I was not there.
Yes, right.
And I think Rachel was like, why don't you go see the sun? And like I stepped outside for like 10 minutes and talked to Rachel and Shane, and it was like, okay, that's I can't talk to anyone else right now. I have to go inside. So I apologize to anyone that I ignored or did not see.
Yeah,
there.
I hear you. Yeah, I mean, the work you did was huge. Thank you very much for climbing into that bunker and not really coming up for air for the entire show. But yeah, we had the demonstration room, which was off to the side and super cool because it was a nice kind of more of a private space to fit some people in and have some uninterrupted demos. But in the main room, it was just circled with workbenches, and everyone at the benches were doing their own demos and holding conversations. And I mean, people from Dan Fea to Denev from Lee Nielsen to
John Coffey, French Polishing,
Mike Michelli, Tim Coleman, like
Al Breed.
Yes. Al Breed. Oh. Yes. So that was cool. So unfortunately, Steve Latta couldn't make it. He was one of our scheduled demonstrators. So it's like, oh, well, who do we get in Steve's place? Oh, how about Al Breed, one of the consummate carvers alive today, period, coming off the bench. So that was like Michael Cooper coming off the bench during, Showtime Lakers era. That was awesome. So what I was, and then what we did for the second day is we had like kind of the fine woodworking bench with a big banner behind there. I did a very poor attempt at trying to do some demos and ended up just really enjoying talking to people and walking around. So we had some scheduled demonstrations at the main bench. Bob Van Dyke, who got to do a sand shading. Dan Fea talked about carving a cabriolet. John Coffey talked about doing a French polish finish. And that was so cool to have, all these folks. It was just loaded, almost too loaded, like way too much talent. Like this was an obscene amount of woodworking knowledge and experience in this one place. That was really, really cool. We did an article on making your own solar kiln in the most recent issue.
Brennan.
And the author brought in a scale model of the solar kiln.
So
it's like the ultimate science fair project. He had that on a bench and he was amazed because it's like this thing had just come out. And he goes, I was amazed at how many people had actually read the article already and were asking me questions. And one person, she was actually starting on her own version of the kiln as well. So I think that speaks to the special quality of our readers.
Yeah. Well, and Brennan was there after us. He was there helping move workbenches after the fact and everything. It was like, when I was packed up, I was like totally spent. All of a sudden I was like, hey, Brennan, how you doing? He was like, good. I was like, I'm going home. But, his little scale model was just adorable as all get out. And I love how enthusiastic he is. And we're actually, I had just recently reached out to him about having him on the podcast and talking about milling some lumber and drying it and all that stuff. And maybe we'll have Logan from Pop Wood on too.
Perfect.
So so that'll be coming up. It's so good to see the community gather in one spot or so many members of the community and the online woodworking community especially. And but it makes me wonder, and I guess we haven't talked about this, but do you see us doing it again?
Well, I mean, now I kind of feel for the folks at Handworks, where every time they run it, they say never again, never again. Yeah. And usually it has to take about a year getting away from it before they say, okay, we'll do it next year. Yeah, and also really special thanks to folks at Woodpecker and Blue Spruce and Shaper. Their contributions really made it happen because this was a free event, but there's a huge overhead for this kind of stuff, even as simple as we made it. All the demonstrators volunteered their time. Everyone there was just, there to really support the school, support the magazine, and just really honestly, just because we can't help ourselves doing this kind of stuff. Like there is no monetary compensation equal to just getting amidst fellow woodworkers and talking and hanging out, a super special thing. So, so we did have some sponsorship, but this was by no means a money-making venture for the magazine. It was just like, why are we doing this? Hey, we're just throwing a party, and how much are we charging? No, it's just free. It's like, really? Yeah, it's just going to be a blast. So going into it, that was it. It's been a long time since we've done a live event. I had a blast at Handworks, and I just wanted to offer that opportunity. And talking to a lot of people, I think that everybody involved, everybody who attended, seemed to have a pretty good time. I certainly had a good time. I think it was worth our while, and not everything you do has to, equal something on the bottom line or be this huge over the top marketing or promotional experience. Sometimes you can just leverage what we're good at to do something fun. I would definitely hope to do that. I think I tend to be really, really pessimistic about all things in life. So for me to kind of look back and say that kind of went about as well as I could have expected, I'm happy with it, but I'd love to hear from folks who came to the event and, what can we do different? What can we change? Where did we miss the mark? How can we make it better? Internally, we've had a lot of these conversations already. And since we spent about an hour talking as a staff yesterday about what we can do, doing it again, I guess that kind of answers the question that we're probably going to do it again.
In some form or another. I'd be shocked if we didn't. And it's exciting to me because we learn and we get better every time. Like when we did the other version of Fine Woodworking Live, I felt like it took like 3 years before we were like, okay, now we know how to do this, you know? I would be really excited to do it again. And there's lots of things that we would do differently, I think. And just to amplify what you said, it's like without Shaper and Woodpeckers and Blue Spruce, that's not happening because there was a big old tent that we had to rent, and all of the porta potties and the food trucks and all of that stuff that required serious money, right? And you can't do that for a free event without sponsorship.
Yeah. And
they were great to work with, and it was really cool to see their presentations. Shaper had, Owen Madden come in, and Larissa and Kyle Kidwell. And the thing that I was really amazed by, well, two things. So Blue Spruce, they're handsaws. They're not messing around.
No,
and,
very nice.
And I guess the main saw maker, if you will, I forget his name.
Jared Green. Yeah.
Jared Green gave a presentation, and really, like, I would have thought that, like, it's like, a couple people making these saws, and they're really passionate about it. And this guy's as knowledgeable as it gets. And then did you get one of his business cards?
Yes.
It's so cool.
Yes, where is it? I got it here for the
It's
folks.
like one of those really big, thick Blue Spruce scrapers that, like...
Yeah, it's a credit card size scraper, which is amazing. I think you could actually use this. Why not?
Yeah.
You definitely can. Yeah, so here's my business card. It's like, that's okay.
That's style. Props to Amanda, because I think she got one and she was like, I need to get one for Ben. So she grabbed me a second one. She's got my back. But yeah, super cool. And we couldn't have asked for better sponsors for the event. So, and yeah, thanks again to Bob and all that. And it was just really good to see it all happen, and hopefully we'll do it again.
Yeah.
Hey, for the community, if you could do me a favor, and if you've got really good photos of like the crowd out there, reaching out to the podcast audience, which is, always our first go-to audience. If you've got photos of the crowd of the event that like really gave the feeling of being there, if you could send them to the shop talk at finewoodworking.com, I'd appreciate it, because we didn't get that and we should have. So
yeah, I took a fair amount of photos. I was really excited to like see them after the fact. And it's like, these are all terrible, and that they just didn't convey the scope of the event and the energy and the excitement. So
it's a hard thing unless you're like in Fine Woodworkings in the past. I think we had like John Tatro like dedicated to like, you have to go get photos of that capture the vibe, and we forgot to pass that assignment along this time. So
yeah, that's part of my 5% I was really bad at was let's get some pictures. Okay.
That's all right. You're forgiven.
Thank you, Ben.
So, Mike, real quick, before we cut over to Sophie and Amanda talking about metal woodworking, it's supposed to be a woodworking podcast. We have a couple of questions we thought that we'd throw in the pile. And so this first question is from Nick. And at first, the subject line on this email was really confusing me. It was colored Kumiko panels. I was like, what is happening? And then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, people are like riffing and this could be really cool. So Nick asked, I recently took a box making class with Mike Pekovich that featured a small Kumiko panel. After completing said box, I decided to incorporate this technique into an upcoming build, a console-style entertainment center. I have only seen Kumiko done with blondish/white colored woods, but I'm considering a different look to my piece. If I wanted to say make the panels of a dark blue or black color, how would I go about doing this? Staining or dyeing seems like the obvious answer, but doing this after assembly would be tedious and result in a less than perfect results. Would doing the strips before sizing and trimming pieces to length be a good idea? Would dye penetrate deep enough to make the entire strip uniform in color or through and through? Am I overthinking this? Anytime somebody asks, am I overthinking this? That is the answer.
That is the answer.
So that is from Nick. What have you, so first off, you generally use boxwood, right? Or pine?
I use basswood or Eastern white pine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you put like paper behind it a lot, and that's like your kind of color pop or your accent pop. Okay.
So the pieces, and I don't finish the parts, but this conversation sort of comes up in that vein as well. So if I think dyeing the strips of wood before you get going, I think that is a good idea. I think that's the only idea. And while I do kind of sand the surface of the panel once everything is together, you don't necessarily have to. And I don't know if a dye in pine is going to saturate enough to where you could just kind of lightly sand the surface and not lose any color. The other thing I might try is that go ahead and dye all the parts, and then because all the sides are already dyed, try to find a way to just really carefully hit just the surface. They have those dye markers. They just look like markers. I don't know if you could, get a dye and then get sort of a dye marker matching that same color and just really lightly hit the surface of the strips. That could work. I would definitely be interested in trying that. I had a wacky idea. I'm not going to mention it this second, but before I say, the other alternative is to use different woods. Desmond King, who wrote, I think 4 books now on Kumiko, on one of the covers of the book, that maybe the second book, it's this pictorial scene, all rendered in Kumiko of like a lighthouse and fireworks and all the different colors in the panel were created using different colors of wood. And I've seen other makers too incorporate various colors of wood into the panel as well, which can be really, really successful. But during the event, on the bench next to the fine woodworking bench was Tad Fallon, who's like museum level furniture restoration expert, and his area of focus is on gold leaf and gold leaf restoration. And in watching him do that, it's like, I'm getting some like gold leaf into my work. So I was thinking about, having wood, dyeing it all black before I assemble it, but then just gold leaf, just the front face of that. I mean,
just the Kumiko?
Of the Kumiko, like a gold leaf Kumiko panel. And yes, this is going to be like the tackiest thing in the world, but it's not going to stop me from wanting to just see it. I mean, that could be amazing. But also like gold leaf, I love these ideas of like traditional techniques, but utilizing them in a way that gets away from, say, the context from which you normally see it, like a heavily carved gilded picture frame with a old musty oil painting sticking in it. But I could even just see like maybe interior parts of boxes or cabinets where you open it and then there's this bright pop of gold leaf areas in there. It just got me thinking. It's like one of those things where, not just like, well, I don't want to do old picture frames, I guess I'm not going to get into gold leaf, but it's like, ooh, okay, what can I do with this? So anyway, I don't know, is doing gold leaf Kumiko next on my list? No, but it's stuck in my head and it's probably going to come out somewhere. So
like, I love a lot of electric guitars have like, a two-tone thing going on, a lot of like dyed work and then planed away to show the wood underneath it. And I love that idea of like a thing on the surface of the Kumiko and then like creating a shadow of the natural wood. That's super cool. So for Nick, I would wonder if, is staining really that difficult to do? I think if you wanted to assemble the panel, and then dye it, I think that's possible, but I think I would agree with you where dye the strips, and then you're going to have to touch up at the very least, some spots. I think the main key thing that I would do is try and pop the grain, with, water and sand it before you do any dyeing, because I think once you get all the little fuzzies on those Kumiko strips, it's going to be a real tough time. So maybe even like just do a spit coat of shellac over the strips, to keep that all sealed in. And then, I would honestly start thinking about spraying a dye. You can use one of those, little aerosol, you get the glass bottle, Prevo something, it's a little glass bottle with the aerosol top. And that might be a really good way of just spraying the whole thing, all in one fell swoop after it's assembled. So many different ways of going though.
Could you dip the whole thing? Just drop
I thought about that, but that'd be fine. Yeah. But like, what if it like I think that could be dramatically bad too. It could be great and easy, or like, oh no, what happened? So, but yeah, I do not see stain, penetrating anywhere near all the way through any sort of Kumiko strips,
or just enough through the surface to where you're not going to skim it.
Well, what if you, would this be really, really difficult to do white oak and then fume the whole thing?
White oak would be hard, like
Yeah.
and also I would try to stay towards more of a closed pour woods. The white oak, just the scale of the strips, I think it's going to look kind of a little busy. Yeah.
That's the thing right there. Okay.
Yeah. I think even walnut, which we think of being closed poured, actually has pretty prominent pores, but I would try it with walnut, um, just because the color is so nice. Probably
Yeah.
cherry. Cherry is probably more close. Yeah, cherry, walnut, pine, maple. I'd stay away from maybe like ash, white oak, red oak, anything super ring porous.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. All right, let's answer. Chase writes in, and they say, I'm going to attempt my first frame and panel door soon. I thought of pre-finishing the panel pretty early on. There don't seem to be any downsides to the operation. Finishing the frame pieces seems to be a gamble. You have to avoid the glue surfaces or else you're in trouble. Which do you suggest? No finish on any of the frame until it's glued up, just finish the inside of the grooves, or try and get as much finished as possible and touch up around the glue joints. I'm planning on using water locks if that helps. Lots of articles available online for building the door. Most don't mention the finishing steps. So, you've been known to frame and panel.
I've framed and paneled in my time.
Yeah.
I think it depends. I do a lot of pre-finishing, and a lot of it has to do on the context of the pieces themselves. So if I'm doing a box or case with exposed joinery and I'm not doing any sanding or planing to the parts after assembly, then pre-finishing makes a lot of sense. And so a frame and panel door, so if it's a flat panel where the rails meet the flat frame, so the four parts of the frame are flush, that means you're probably going to be doing some sanding or planing on those surfaces afterwards anyway. So it may not make sense to be pre-finishing the majority of the frames. And then on the panel, let's say it's a raised panel, you can pre-finish the entire panel, or you can finish just the raised portion that fits into the groove. The main thing traditionally why you are pre-finishing the panel often has to do with like painted frame and panels, where if you just have it assembled, paint it, and then the panel shrinks, you have this line of unfinished wood. So I think it's very common if you're painting panels to paint just that outside border of the panel so that if it shrinks, you still see paint. And for me, when it comes to pre-finishing, if I'm not pre-finishing the surfaces of the frames because I'm planing, and certainly not the outside, because you will typically build your door frame oversized and trim it to fit the opening afterwards. So any pre-finishing is going to get cut off. But I would say at the minimum, you could just put some water locks around the edges of the panel and then on the inside faces of the door frames. Just, obviously you don't need to get into the groove for the panel, but if you can get just a light coat of finish on the inside faces, what that means is that when you put everything together, you're not working really hard to get a little rag or something to get finish down into that intersection of the panel and the inside of the frame. If those are pre-finished, it means that even if you miss a little mark here or there, it's still going to look finished, and it's going to avoid the possibility of getting like a lot of puddling or dripping into those areas because you're working so hard to get finish in there. So I would say panel, at least the edges, or you can hit the whole panel. If you're hitting the panel, make sure you hit the front and the back, because that can, if you finish just one face, that can cause that piece to bow or cut quite a bit. I would say if I had a hard border, like a little rabbet, next to that raised portion of the panel or fillet, and I could stop that finish right on that raised portion, I would. If I had sort of a flat panel, sometimes it could be tough with the oil finish, where if you do a partial finish around the edges, let it dry, then you come back and put another coat on. There's always that kind of witness line between that pre-finished area and then that other area that you finished later on. So if there's a really hard boundary, I could hit just that. Otherwise, I would probably pre-finish the whole panel. Ben mentioned raising the grain earlier in relation to dyeing. I think it comes into play here. So if you pre-finish the whole panel and then sand it down, it may even look sort of unfinished. In fact, I would probably just use shellac because it dries quickly. So coat the whole panel with shellac, sand it down. It's still going to look like bare wood, but the finish is going to be on there, and the grain, now that it's raised and sanded flush, you're going to be able to build a finish on top of that really easily without having to try to work and get rid of raised grain, again, in tight little nooks and crannies. So yeah, definitely easier to do that. Yeah.
Cool. Right on.
Yeah, that's the reason why we don't cover that, because it's like a really long answer. So we just leave it out and just try to cover it somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, but we've all seen that door, the painted door with the line
Yes.
of bare wood, and that's just like the perfect reminder of the do's and don'ts of framing panels.
In fact, it's like right behind me. If you're looking at it, there's like a raised panel door that I just painted it white, and I'm looking at. If I look close, I've got that little strip of wood right there. So,
well, now we all know.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike.
Hey, thank you, Ben, and thanks again for all your help over the weekend. That was a blast. And if you didn't make it this year, check out the live stream, and we're hopefully going to do it again next year as well.
Woodcraft Supply knows that woodworking is more than just a hobby. It's your passion. And with Woodcraft's new everyday value, now it's a little more affordable. Woodcraft has lowered the prices on hundreds of essentials that woodworkers use every day, like Bessie clamps, Wood River hand planes, Type-Bond wood glue, dust collection fittings, and more. Check them out online at woodcraft.com or go to one of their 70-plus stores nationwide. It's just another way that since 1928, Woodcraft has been helping you make wood work.
Hi, Sophie. How are you doing?
And
Thanks for joining us. I wanted to do an episode where we talked about, we had you on a couple weeks ago, and it kind of prompted a few questions from people on how to use metalworking in their woodworking practice. Yeah. And you're the perfect person for that. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So I was looking at your Instagram, and you just wrapped up a rocking chair.
Did. Yeah.
Which is super cool. For those who didn't listen to the last episode, Sophie works in metal, but reproduces traditional American furniture. And you can correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but it looks like wood, but it's made out of metal.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah.
So it's really impressive work. I loved the bronze wool you were using to weave the seat.
Yeah.
That looked like so much work.
It was, yeah.
So you're just coiling it by hand.
Yeah, pretty much. And the way that it works, because it's essentially just like individual strands of like tiny pieces of bronze. So like it wants to twist in the other direction as I'm coiling it. So I have to like untwist it from the roll and then keep coiling it in the direction that I need it to go. So it's more work than it needed to be, but it is what it is.
It looks amazing. Yeah. So you've done steel wool and bronze wool for seats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I was like shocked you were doing that with just your bare hands.
Well, I've tried doing it with like gloves before, and like the metal files just like get into the gloves, and it ends up just being a mess. And then I've tried like nitrile gloves before, and it just like eats them up.
Okay.
It's just easier to do it bare hands.
Steel.
Yeah.
That's fair.
My fingers are they're like calloused over right now, but
sure.
they're healed.
Yeah, but we all got a little of that, so I get it totally.
Yeah.
What do you have upcoming? Any cool stuff upcoming?
No immediate projects. I do have a bunch of workshops this summer, so wood and metal workshops. So my first one is at the Center for Metal Arts, which is next week, actually. So I'll be teaching a steel box making class, and just kind of like an intro to welding and things like that, and sheet metal fabrication. And then I'll be teaching at Penland and Pocosin School of Craft or School of Arts and Crafts, and Aeromont. So I got a bunch of workshops lined up. So summer's just getting started. Yeah.
That sounds busy. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On that topic, since we're talking about starting out beginning welding and how to get started in metalwork, is there kind of wanted to get into this last time, but is there, for a woodworker wanting to just get started in metalworking, is there certain tools you'd recommend or that you started out with?
Yeah. So the way I kind of got into this particular body of work was through a residency I was doing at the Appalachian Center for Craft. And it was actually I was a wood resident there. So and they had a metal shop there, but it wasn't, I mean, I could use it if I wanted to, but I was like fresh out of grad school. So I had like some tools at my disposal, but I really wanted to get some of my own tools just to kind of work a little bit more independently. So I was able to get my TIG welder, just a little tiny Miller TIG welder, through a grant I got from the Tennessee Arts Commission. So that was kind of nice. So definitely having a welder, probably first on the list.
Yeah.
Then I just had my angle grinder for a long time. And an angle grinder is like one of the most versatile tools you can have because I can grind metal, I can cut it. I can do a lot of finishing work with my angle grinder. So it was like one of the most versatile tools that I had. So really for a long time, I had my welder and my angle grinder, and that was about it. And then I had some sort of metal like work. It was basically just a piece of plate steel that I use as my welding table on top of two 2x4s. So that was what I had mostly at the time. And that worked out for quite a while. Yeah.
That's great. So I always get confused between like MIG and TIG welding.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of general confusion for those not familiar with it.
Sure.
How does TIG welding work versus, is that the one with the stick?
Kind of. So like MIG welding stands for metal inert gas. And it's basically just like a big hot glue gun for welding. So you actually have a piece of what's called filler rod running through the gun that is also used to actually make the weld. So it's constantly feeding material as it's heating it up and welding the two surfaces together. So it's a very user-friendly process. If you can use a hot glue gun, you can use a MIG welder. And a TIG welder stands for tungsten inert gas. And the tungsten is the electrode that's used to kind of create that electric arc. And that's what's used and then you add the filler rod manually to that. So it's sort of similar to stick welding in that you have an electrode attached to one piece and you're just kind of running a bead along the two surfaces that you're trying to weld together. And then with the TIG, you're adding the filler rod to it manually. So it's two separate. It's almost like driving a car. It's like a little bit more coordination in that way. And there's also a gas pedal involved. So that's controlling how much gas is feeding through the machine too. Yeah. So it's a little bit more like driving a car.
Oh, okay. But do you find that is there like more flexibility with a TIG welder and what you can do?
And for me, because I grind down all my welds, the TIG welding, the actual weld is a lot more refined and it's a lot smaller. So it's a little bit less grinding work for me to do.
Oh, okay.
The MIG welder is great if you have like lots of pieces together and you're trying to just like very quickly what's called tack them together. And you can just like shoot a nice little spot of weld on there and then it's together and that can kind of hold everything in place. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, now I've seen that and I didn't know the difference. So that's helpful. Mm-hmm. So you would recommend a TIG welder, just assuming they're going to be doing more refined.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to be leaning that way, you certainly can. And then a lot of machines too are multi-process machines. So you can actually get machines that do both now, which is kind of nice.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. Then outside of that, is there like larger machines you had to invest in, that you've invested in since diving into this?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I got the Minic Fellowship through the Society of Arts and Crafts and the John D. Minic Foundation. So it's a $25,000 prize.
Amazing. Yeah.
They gave it to me for some reason it's for furniture people specifically, and typically it's woodworkers, but I was fortunate enough to get it in 2022. So that enabled me to buy a whole bunch of machines and both woodworking and metalworking machines. So now I've pretty much expanded my process a bit. So I got a MIG welder. I got my little plasma cutter, which is great. And I got some other more sheet metal fabrication machines, like an English wheel and a slip roll and things like that. Yeah, so I've got all sorts of things now.
That's great. That kind of ties into one of the questions. So I might ask you that right now. Our first question is actually from Austin, who says, I didn't see a plasma cam or other plasma cutting machine, but he was asking if you use a plasma cutter in templates or mostly freehanding your pieces.
Yeah. So I do use I make a lot of templates just out of Masonite. And then I'll use my plasma cutter just to kind of work my way around it that way. Like I've thought about investing in sort of more CNC type stuff, but my brain just doesn't have the capacity.
Yeah, it's a whole different thing. Yeah.
And it's just much easier for me to just draw out whatever shape I need to draw out. And then I account for the torch head. So there's like a little bit, so my template ends up being a little bit smaller than it actually ends up being when I cut it out in steel. But it's just easier for my brain to figure it out that way, draw it out.
I get that. Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's nice too. Yeah, I'd imagine if you were doing a large volume of things, that's where you would maybe outsource that kind of thing, or
yeah.
But you're doing more
like production style pieces. So
right. Have you ever done a production run of anything, or
not really? I've been toying around with making like smaller pieces, so making more like steel boxes, and I do like wooden bandsaw boxes all the time. So that's probably like the closest I've gotten to production stuff. But I really enjoy just doing the reproduction work, really. It's a lot more challenges and fun stuff involved with that. Yeah.
That's awesome. We have another question from, Ben Strana wanted to ask this, and he said he wanted to know what you think woodworkers can do to safely cut metal on our poor old bandsaws. I don't know how much if you're investing in metalworking specific machines, or you're able to kind of go back and forth with.
Well, I guess a general rule for me, and it comes down to like a safety aspect, is to just keep the two things as separate as possible. And it's easier to clean things if everything's in separate spaces. And I know that's not everyone's going to have like separate spaces for their wood and metal stuff. But to keep them as separate as possible is usually the best way to go. But if you're setting up a bandsaw to cut metal, it really comes down to the blade. And most like older bandsaws will cut metal too. You just need to switch the blade out to something that's got a much higher TPI. So, and usually a general rule is that you want to have, if you're cutting sheet metal specifically, or even like bar metal, you want to have 3 teeth that are cutting through the thickness of the material at one time. So if you're cutting something super thin, then you want to have a really high TPI for that.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're cutting like 1/8 inch thick stuff, and you want to have 3 teeth at least cutting through that at once. And then wasn't a metal specific question, but like brass and bronze and copper are a lot softer than steel. So you want to probably get like a carbide blade if you can for cutting steel, just because it's going to eat through those teeth like nothing. But usually cutting like non-ferrous materials, so stuff that doesn't have iron in it, like your brass and your coppers and things like that, it'll be a little bit easier to cut through those just with some different bandsaw blades. Yeah.
Do you do any, we did have another question kind of tied into this concerning lathes. Do you use a wood lathe? Have you used a wood lathe to cut metal at all? Or is that needs to be metal specific? It's
usually like two totally, it's the same style of machine, but there's usually totally different cutter heads for cutting metal. And it's usually set up in a totally different apparatus. You're not usually freehanding like you would a wood lathe, the tools for a wood lathe. But you probably, I don't know if I'd recommend, I definitely wouldn't recommend cutting steel on a wood lathe. And usually you want to do it at a much slower RPM too.
Right.
You can maybe cut some small pieces of brass and copper on a wood lathe, but usually if you're doing something that small, you could probably just get like a little tabletop like metal lathe. Like Harbor Freight makes a decent one. That's the one I have at home, and I don't use it all that much, but
Yeah, nice little
yeah.
thing to have. I feel like I've seen my shopmate Eric do like little brass pools or something on the lathe.
Yeah,
But
again, it's a softer material, so it's also not going to abuse the steel wood lathe tools, so the
mm,
gouges and things like that. So like definitely non-ferrous stuff should probably be okay on a wood lathe, but yeah.
yeah, that's great. How is your shop set up to kind of like separate the wood and metal aspects?
Well, I was fortunate enough to move to Pennsylvania. Like my partner and I moved to Pennsylvania few years ago, I guess 3 years ago now. And we bought our house mostly for the shop that came with it. So it was a basically a detached garage, but there was two buildings to it, but you can sort of walk in between them. So there was a cinder block building, and then at some point there was a wood building added to it. So it just kind of came with two different shops, and I was just like, God. It was like perfect for what we needed at the time. So I just got lucky, really, and was able to have two separate shops. But when I was working at the craft center, I was actually working I had a separate studio from the main wood studio. So I did a lot of my welding in there. And it was actually really spacious. It was also just kind of a separate space. But I also did a residency at the Vermont Studio Center, where they had their wood and their metal shop in the same room. And basically the way they divided it was they had opposite ends. So wood was on one side, metal was on the other side. And then they just had some welding curtains sort of in the middle. And that sort of keeps all the sparks at bay and just kind of keeps them as separate as possible, but still allows them to move around if they need to and move machines around and things like that. So it is possible to have them in the same space for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And welding curtains are just, I'm not even familiar with what those are. But
they're basically just like these, usually they're like orange in color, but they come in all sorts of different colors, but they're just like really thick pieces of plastic, essentially. I forget what kind of plastic it is, but it's like a heat resistant plastic or whatever. And you can either buy metal frames or you can make metal frames to hang them up on, and then you can just kind of move them around wherever you need to. And it keeps so most welding, you can get what's called arc burn or flash burn. So it's actually bright enough to give you a sunburn. So it actually, if you're walking past them too, it actually diffuses a lot of that light. So it's not like blinding for whoever's walking by too. So they kind of do a purpose in that way. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I have seen that now that I just wasn't familiar with the term. So if you were somebody like me who has a designated wood shop and wanted to integrate that, you could set up those and make it kind of function that way.
Yeah, for sure. And then you can also there also is they make like pieces of, I think they're like, it's not really carpet, but they put like pieces of some kind of like heat retardant fabric that goes under fireplaces, typically not fireplaces, but fire pits. So if you have like a wooden floor, for example, you can put that down. I forget the name of that particular piece of fabric, but it's like a heat resistant or fire resistant tarp or something like that. So you can actually put that down on the floor to protect the wooden floor too.
Nice. Yeah. That was my next question.
Yeah.
So as far as like, we talked about tooling, but if you were to start TIG welding, do you have like a particular, like, would you just go out and buy, if you're starting out, you're just trying to get the hang of TIG welding on your own, would you just go buy a certain type of steel and like throw together?
Yeah. The best way to learn how to weld is to just practice doing it. And that's pretty much how I learned to do it. So you can buy like pieces of bar steel. You can get just pieces of steel like at any big box store or any good hardware store should have pieces of steel. And just like practice making like little beads or like we call them stack of dimes. So they just kind of look like overlapping dimes on top of each other to get a good bead. And yeah, so one thing you want to make sure of is to make sure that the metal is clean. And that includes whether it has, usually a lot of steel will have what's called mill scale on it. So the mill scale comes from how that shaped piece of metal was produced, and that's either through a hot rolled process or a cold rolled process. And hot rolled is it's basically run through with heat to create a particular shape, and it's extruded through various machines to get its shape. And the heat produces what's called that mill scale. So it has kind of like a bluish blackish color, and it's also like a little bit coarser in texture. And then cold roll just looks like the steel that we're like the silvery color. And usually there's like a little bit of grease on it to keep it from rusting while it's in the store. So you just want to make sure that's nice and clean. And any mill scale, you can just kind of get off with a angle grinder. Or if you have like a sanding setup, you can do that too. And I usually just clean my steel with Simple Green. I use Simple Green on everything.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's how I used to clean table saw blades too, like to get the gunk off of table saw blades. It's like perfect for that. So I usually just use Simple Green to clean it. But you can also use like acetones and things like that too. Yeah,
that's funny.
Practice. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I use Simple Green for like cleaning any blades or router bits or whatever. It works great.
It's so good.
Yeah. It's like you're not worried about the chemical aspect. So it's
I know, because it's like supposed to be, it's like natural or whatever. And it's like, I love that stuff.
It smells good. How often are you working with non-ferrous material?
Well, I don't do it too often. I have worked with like copper in a few pieces before, like way back in the day. And actually, for a table I had just made, I worked with copper mesh. So there wasn't like really any like welding involved with that, but I had to like sew it because I turned it into like a bag for the underneath side of a table. That was weird, and I didn't really know how it was gonna. It's basically the same stuff as window screening, so it was stiff, but I wanted it to act like a stiffer fabric, so it was weird to work with. And then I used the bronze recently on that rocking chair I just made, but so I don't do it too often. It's nice to just like add a different color to things every now and then too.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And your painting process or adding color, is there like a certain paint you use?
I just use spray paint.
That works. Yeah, that's great. I've seen like people do powder. I didn't know if you did any like powder coating or stuff like that.
I used to do a lot of powder coating, not for this body of work, but for like earlier works, because it is a great way to add color to a piece. The problem with powder coating is that like I don't use a lot of Bondo to like fill in like gaps or anything like that. But like if you're powder coating something because it's heated up to get the powder on there, you can't like Bondo anything. So it has to be like perfectly seamless, and like it's just got to be perfect before you. And then you have to like sandblast it typically. So there's like a lot more prep involved with that that you really don't have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And the spray painting, like I could use like automotive paints too, but that stuff's just like nasty to work with. So the spray paint's just like slightly less nasty, and it's cheap. It works just fine. Because great. I like sand it all back, most of it back anyway. It's durable enough to last a while. So
yeah. How often do you? I know your pieces are in galleries. Larissa, my shopmate, was telling me you were in a gallery she visited recently.
Was it the Wayne Art Center show? Maybe
it must have been that one.
Yeah.
I actually heard your name a couple times at our event this weekend.
Larissa's such a good hype man. I love her.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
But so the Wayne Art Center. How often do you have people? I mean, obviously you can interact with the pieces, but are they more? How often are you like having people interact and sit in the chairs and?
So I used to have people like sit in the chairs and things and just have them be functional in that way. But now I'm sort of leaning towards them not doing that, especially with this rocking chair, just because the bronze is really fragile. And if someone just like sat in it and it broke, I would be so heartbroken. But I do often, like if I'm talking about a piece in a gallery, I'll like actually knock on it so they know that it's steel. Because a lot of the time they don't see it on first impression. And then if I'm actually like not hitting it, but like knocking on it or like having it make noise and they hear that it's metal and not wood, they're just like, oh my God.
Yeah. I was asking that because like the way you do the spray painting technique and the way it's kind of worn through, like really does look exactly like wood in the photograph. So it has to be a whole different experience seeing and like realizing, hey, this is not what you think it is.
And it's funny too, because I apply to shows pretty frequently. And I was told, like, I had gotten into a show, I forget where, but like I almost didn't get into a show because the juror thought that I was just submitting like antique pieces of furniture in as my work. So they actually weren't like reading what the pieces were made of. And then someone pointed out like, hey, this is like not a wood piece of furniture. It's actually all steel. And they were just like, oh my God.
That must be flattering though, that it's that like
Yeah,
deceiving.
it's convincing for sure. But it makes me wonder, like, have I not gotten into other shows because of that?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It is really deceiving. Like photographs, I wouldn't, unless you told me, I would have no idea.
Yeah, yeah. And another question I get a lot too is like why I decide to hide the steel, like why I paint them. But I'm not like in my mind, I'm not really hiding them because I am rusting them too.
Right.
So that's just something that steel does. So like it's not like I'm hiding it, sure, but I'm also like really showing off that it's made out of steel.
Yeah, it's exposed.
Yeah. So
and
it's always an interesting question for me to answer in front of people. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you comfortable sharing your like technique for rust or doing like the patina?
Yeah. So I paint them first with whatever color. And then I'll sand it back, usually by hand. I actually did my little orbital sander this time around just because I'm getting older and my fingers suck. Getting older sucks. And then the rust solution I use is actually one that I learned from Vivian Beer, who was a big mentor for me for many years and still is to this day. It's just a mixture of distilled white vinegar, peroxide, and salt. And I just spray it on or brush it on. It rusts it instantly. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that's also like nice that you're not having to work with these crazy. I would have assumed some crazy chemical.
Yeah.
a lot of these are really accessible things.
Yeah, because I mean I'm still a pretty poor. I feel like still a college student, but I'm still on a budget pretty frequently. So anytime I could use like stuff that's either just around the house and certainly like not noxious materials either, because I'm more conscious of that too nowadays. It's better for me in the long run. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
But we did have a couple more questions. This one I mentioned to you before the show might not be exactly your wheelhouse, but I bet you'd have a good answer for this. So Nathan asks, may not be quite the topic, but I'd love to know the best methods for gluing brass and metal to wood, such as an inlay that can hold up to some sanding without getting too hot and melting the glue. I've got some laser cut brass that I'm inlaying into walnut and gluing with epoxy. Hit all with a belt sander in order to even the surface. If the brass is higher than the wood in some areas, it heats up, and if I go too far with the sanding, it melts the epoxy. Just looking for a better method.
Well, in terms of the glue, really epoxy is the best answer. And the way I did it once before, so like back in college, the first time around, I was making this box that had some brass inlays in walnut. And it was a walnut veneered box. It was important to keep the thicknesses like the same as possible. And you can get brass in different thicknesses. And then you can also do like either commercial veneers for the walnut or you can make your own veneers. You can saw it to your own thickness. So it's really important to just keep them as same thickness as possible. And then I assume they're like routing a shape into that panel so that the brass fits into it, just making sure that the depth of that cut is the same thickness as the brass. And in terms of sanding it down, like I imagine it's probably pretty thick if he's like getting it that hot in order for it to melt the epoxy. So I imagine it's probably like quite a bit thicker than the wood, or it's like quite a bit raised above the surface. Brass is soft enough where you can do it by hand for the most part, and it's not going to create too much heat too. So I'd probably try to sand it by hand as much as I can. And then again, trying to make sure that my brass or copper or whatever metal it is just kind of this as close to the same thickness as whatever I routed out to inlay it into. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That would be my thought too, is getting as close as possible. And I've been sanding a lot of brass lately, so it does get hot on the machine, but hand sanding is usually fine. Okay.
Yeah, it's soft enough where it's like not gonna do much damage and not going to create too much heat because it's definitely a different heat retention for sure from brass.
Oh,
yeah.
So, one thing we talked about on the last episode you were on was kerf bending metal, which I thought was really cool because it's a woodworking technique we're all familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But I never thought of applying it to metal.
Yeah.
So what's your process for doing that?
Yeah. So I'm not gonna say I developed that technique because obviously I didn't, but I needed a way to bend pieces of square tubing mostly because at the time I had my welder and my angle grinder, so those were the only tools I had at my disposal, and I didn't have a tube bender at the time, which would have made it a lot easier. But I also was there was a chair I was making that had it was compound curves. So it was like one of those barrel style chairs. So it had the back that went into the arms. So it curved one way and then curved the other way. So it was actually a little bit easier to do the kerf bending process for that. So I had a piece of, I guess it was like 2 inch or maybe 1.5 inch square tubing. And I just made a series of like 1 inch kerf cuts in it, just leaving the back solid, the back side of the tubing solid. And that gave me enough sort of wiggle room to just kind of bend the pieces by hand together, and then just spot weld them together. And the process for that is kind of insane because if I don't get the curve, like you do it incrementally, which is like the main thing too. So I don't have like massive like facets all around. So so my reasoning for doing it like, or maybe like 3/4 of an inch apart or an inch apart was so I don't have these like massive facets that I have to grind down or figure out how to get rid of. So if I would basically like make a curve and tack it all together, and then recut a lot of those same curves to sort of rebend it again.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I can get a tighter curve by doing it that way. And then once I get it to the curve that I want, then I can just weld the seams up and call it a day.
It's clean.
Yeah.
It's a cleaner radius.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have ever thought of that.
It's like stupid nuts, but it worked.
That's awesome. I don't know that I could have come to that like solution.
Yeah.
Have you done kerf bending in like some sort of plate steel?
I think so. It should still work in plate steel. It's also a good way to like get rid of a lot of weight in the material too.
Yeah.
And like, because I use tubing for most of my pieces just because it keeps the weight significantly down. And I don't do any blacksmithing. And I've gotten questions like, why don't you can just make this out of a solid piece of like 2 inch material and then just like hammer it down. I was like, but it's going to weigh like 1,000 pounds.
Right. Yeah. Also,
so.
Right. And that's a whole investment, like a whole separate thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, like, I'm thinking of really thick plate, which you're probably not using, but no, that totally makes sense. And I didn't, the double kerf thing is pretty crazy though. That's smart.
And I think on the same chair too, I had to, because like the way that the arms curved, it also like twisted as it was making its way down a little bit. So you can actually do the kerf bending and make the pieces of metal twist too, which was kind of cool. So instead of like leaving a flat backside to the tubing, you just like you cut to a corner on all.
Oh, wow.
Sides, I guess. And then you can have it twist in place too.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Are there any other like woodworking techniques that you've translated to metal?
I think that was really the only one. I mean, I guess I also like make jigs and things. So those are common woodworking things. So for that, I'm talking about the same chair again. Like to create the seat, I made a jig to bend it around. And so I like drilled a bunch of holes and then clamped it in place. And that's how I did all my tack welds initially. And then I just kind of discovered I didn't really need to do all that. And then certainly like making templates and things like that, which aren't like woodworking specific, but it does come, like the woodworking background does come in handy quite a bit in a lot of ways.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Is there any upcoming, I know you have upcoming classes, but that you mentioned, do you have any shows coming up as well where people can see your work and
Well, some are up now. So I think there's a show at the Westmoreland Museum of American Art, which is outside of Pittsburgh. It's like an anniversary show, and they acquired one of my pieces, so it's actually in that anniversary show. It's like 65 years, 65 artists, or something like that. So that's up through September, I think. And I think I have my George Costanza chair and another table of mine are at the Michener currently, which I think is coming down soon. So I think it's maybe up for another couple of weeks, but it's at the Michener Museum, which is in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. So, and then other than that, I don't think I haven't. Well, no, that's not true. I forget. I have a piece out in the Ohio Craft Museum right now, which is in Columbus, I think. Mm-hmm. So that show's opening this weekend. That's the one with the copper mesh bag table. That piece is there, and I think that's it. I think. I forget
if you think of anything else, I'll add it to our list so everybody can go check those out. Again, really happy to have you on. I'd love to do a follow-up episode where we have more questions and dive more into it. Yeah, but always good talking with you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Well, that does it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. If you have any questions you'd like answered on the show, please send them into shoptalk@taunton.com. If you feel called to, a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts would be so wonderful. And please, please, please think about joining our Discord server. Link in the doobly-doo. And don't forget, finewoodworking.com/elearning for more information about Michael Cullen's surface carving class. Check it out. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thanks for listening.